Lace by Nyarm, Chapter 5, Dirty Laundry. As he walked to the laundry room, Sangwoo started softly humming a little tune. His mother had always sung little songs under her breath like that while working. Well, when father was away at least. He felt that the domesticity of the situation, fragile and false as it may be, was quite endearing. Bum was so helpless that Sangwoo had to do his laundry for him. It was almost funny, both because of Bum's general incapability and because of the fact that it made him the wife in the scenario. Considering their very different physiques, they didn't really fit into the respective gender roles in a stereotypical nuclear family. Though, perhaps that didn't matter, because the fact that they didn't have a child negated the whole structure. Maybe Bum was the child too. He was helpless enough and desperate enough for the affection to qualify after all. Sangwoo cut his musings short once he reached the end of the hall and ducked into the room where he kept his washing machine and dryer. They were old models, seeing as they'd been around longer than he had, but they did the job. He was halfway through shoving the skirt into the washer alongside his other pre-sorted blacks before realizing that he had to go fetch the woman's clothing from the basement. He felt a grin stretch across his face. He had forgotten about her. Bum always seemed to be the only thing on his mind whenever he spent time with the older man. He left the room with a sigh. The basement was dark, damp, and generally unpleasant to be in during the early morning. He was sure Bum thought the same, seeing as the brunette wouldn't shut up about it when he slept there. Sangwoo descended the stairs, pausing to turn on the lights as he went. He really did hate the place, he thought as the harsh yellow light flooded the space, throwing into relief the prone figure at the bottom. The clothing was folded up neatly in the corner and fairly accessible. That fact, and only that fact, kept Sangwoo from being extremely disappointed at the fact that the woman still wasn't awake. He should probably check to see if she died during the night, but found that he didn't really give a fuck at the moment. He went to collect the outfit, footsteps echoing out on the concrete floor as he went. Much to his disappointment, the bitch hadn't woken up. He pouted, feeling very much like a child denied a toy, before exiting the basement. At least the hallway was much nicer to be in than the hard, cold basement. The tall male decided to give the clothing in his arms a cursory glance. It was still very cute, and that lifted his spirits considerably. A cute outfit for his cute, chubby-cheeked bum. The sweater was a sweet pastel pink, though it had some pilling that indicated it had been well loved and oft worn. The dress's lace had looked very cheap and ugly last night, but looking again, it had delicate little hearts in it. Sangwoo was momentarily surprised. Heart lace was something he had never thought to exist, though he supposed it should be a bit less surprising, seeing as, in his experience, girls really liked hearts. One member of his annoying group of friends, June, seemed to love heart cutouts, for example, though that could be just because she was determined to flaunt herself whenever he was around, rather than an actual love of the style. The behaviour was a bit unappealing, but she herself was pretty enough. Looked vaguely like Bum even, with those sad puppy dog eyes of hers. He was actually attracted to Bum, so perhaps the comparison was unfair, an insult to Bum, even to compare him with such a vapid, desperate girl. He was back in the laundry room now, so he decided to shelve those thoughts for later. He tossed the 2 pieces in the washing machine, just wanting to get it over with. Ordinarily, he wouldn't be so wasteful, he thought as he poured the blue detergent. Sangwoo reasoned that Bum was just special enough to deserve a laundry load of only 2 pieces. Speaking of Bum, he was probably sitting dejectedly in his room at this point, waiting for Sangwoo to come and give him a bath or some other bullshit. He could almost imagine the stupid look on the man's face as he stared, embarrassed, at the ground, as bashful as ever. What a precious boy. After a while of thinking of his dear, Sangwoo realized the machine had stopped. He felt a little silly. How long had he been thinking of Bum? He switched the clothes to the dryer and settled in for another wait, all the while avoiding looking at the clock. He supposed he could go check his phone while he waited in an effort to kill time. The tall male went to fetch it from his jacket he'd hastily discarded the night before in the hallway. It had some charge, luckily, so he went back to the laundry room and leaned against the machine before unlocking it. He had a few dozen messages, annoyingly enough, so he resigned himself to reading through them. The majority were from his group chat, which tended to be flooded by mindless chatter anyways, so he scanned through them. Apparently someone had scored and was being congratulated or ribbed by everyone in the chat, except for one prudish girl yapping on about innocence and purity. That one was particularly laughable, considering the fact that she had been clawing his pants off the last time they were at the same party. He had a couple questions asking about homework and a couple from June asking to hang out, but he just ignored those. They could be dealt with later. He spent the rest of his time playing a weird game involving the evolution of alpacas until the clothes were finished drying. He was excited to show them to Bum, so he set his phone down on top of the old dryer and pulled out the clothing. It was a little too hot, but he didn't care much. He walked swiftly to the bedroom and barged right in, startling Bum, who was absently toying with the blankets as expected. The brunette made a cute little yelp of surprise too, which made Sangwoo very happy. He loved the flash of fear on Bum's dismal little face that always accompanied his appearance. "Bum," Sangwoo announced, smiling, "I got you a gift." He raised the bundle in his arms, immediately attracting Bum's attention. What is it? The older asked, looking scared for some reason. Didn't he recognize it was clothing? A new outfit for you, silly. He answered easily. Your current clothes are a little drab. Oh, where'd you get it from? Bum inquired, face twisting with mounting horror. And isn't that girl's clothing? Aren't you grateful? Bum nodded his head very quickly, face morphing from fear to slight panic at the edge in the taller's voice. Good. He hated the man's incessant needy questions. Sangwoo supposed he should probably give Bum a bath before dressing him up, though. He looked a little sweaty, likely because of their actions earlier. Clean clothes and a dirty body don't go together. Chapter 6. Wetter yet wetter. Sangwoo moved towards his now shivering captive wordlessly. It wasn't cold in here, was it? Either way, Bum was in sore need of a bath. He snatched the small's thin arm up and draped it around his broader shoulder. The taller was almost surprised at how tiny Bum was when he felt his frame fall against him, light as ever, so tiny as to be endearing. The brunette was trembling in his arms as he carried him into the cramped bathroom and flicked on the light. Calm down, Bum, you're shaking. Sangwoo chided, smiling lightly while setting the other on the lip of the basin as he spoke. Sorry, Bum mumbled, but the shaking only intensified. He sighed. How helpless could one person be? It was sad, really. He leaned over the man to turn on the bathtub, letting the water rushing out of the spigot cascade over his hand to feel the temperature. Ice cold, but it'd warm up eventually, he thought as he turned the knob controlling the temperature. He set the clothes on the counter before collecting the shampoo and conditioner. Dye safe, of course. Off, he said, pointing at the floor. Bum followed his directions slowly, and unknowingly showed Sangwoo the tempting reveal of inch after inch of the smooth expanse of his chest. He grinned at the man, somewhat lecherously, and once Bum noticed his stare he looked downward and flushed, much to Sangwoo's delight that the same flush trailed down to his shoulders, something he'd never noticed during their late-night encounters in the dark bedroom. By then the bathtub had filled, so Sangwoo carefully lifted Bum up by his arms and helped him step into the bathtub as if he were a little old lady. Wouldn't want him to slip and break his hip. If Bum were going to have any more broken bones, it'd be for the best if the taller was the only one that inflicted them, he thought. Sangwoo chuckled and, so as not to startle his captive, let his hand trail across the man's back as the brunette slipped into the tub. He wondered if Bum felt the imprint of his hand long after they'd left his body. Judging by the man's demure blush, it seemed likely. Bum glanced up at him, wide black eyes nervous in anticipation. Sangwoo was a little irritated that the man was still fearful, but he still felt a little entranced by the doe-eyed look the other man was giving him. Bum was very much like a pretty, ethereal doe in that he was just as skittish and easily frightened. Let's get you cleaned, Sangwoo said as he squirted some soap into his palm, the pearlescent substance distorting under the bright light. He went to apply it on his captive as the brunette nodded, gently rubbing it into the skin in an effort to clean. He let his now slippery hand slip over a nipple, resulting in a slight jolt from his pet. The man's flush had returned full force, and his eyes turned downward once more, a sad attempt to avoid showing Sangwoo his arousal. But Sangwoo knew everything about Bum. He just gave him a small smile, though, and continued bathing the man. He soaped up the brunette's torso before lazily shampooing his hair. He let the thick black strands curl around his fingers as he did so. It was always fun to play with people's hair. Bum made a small whine when a trail of suds got too close to his eyes. It was a babyish action, and Sangwoo found it unfairly cute. He glanced down at the water, slightly murky, with the addition of soap runoff, and decided he ought to speed things up before the water became too dirty. Normally he preferred showers, but his captive's broken legs prevented that method of absolution. Bathing Bum had quickly become one of his favourite activities swiftly after he'd begun. The act carried an intimacy unfamiliar to him and he revelled in it. He hadn't taken baths with anyone since he was 7 and his father had deemed him too old to bathe with his mother. She had always been so gentle as he washed his hair, so patient, so kind. He loved his mother and wanted Bum to love him too, so Sangwoo had always made sure to be as gentle and kind when bathing Bum. He rinsed his captive off with a detachable shower head, pleased to watch the suds slide down Bum's soft skin. It was so pretty when he was damp and the taller male wanted to lick the moisture off of him. Fortunately, that could be done later, so he refrained. Standing up, he tossed a towel over the brunette's wet head. Dry off, he commanded as he began to dig in the cabinet in search of a comb. He could hear rustling as the older of the two stood, hand on toilet for support, and began toweling off, still dripping on the floor of the bathroom. He made himself look busy until he heard his pet's movements still, at which point he spun around and faced the man with a winning smile, comb held aloft, though he had always known where it had been. He allowed his eyes to wander lazily over his captive's still trembling form. He was beautiful even in the sickly white light of the bathroom, a fact impressive in and of itself. Sangwoo knew he'd look even more delectable comfortable in the outfit he'd picked out for him. However, his cock was almost amusingly half-hard, as it usually was after a bath. Homo. He beckoned Bum forward, setting the comb aside in anticipation of the main event, and picked up the dress. It felt nice in his hands. He lifted his captive up and onto the counter, before signalling him to cooperate in the dressing by raising his arms. Sangwoo slowly tugged the dress down over Bum's head, watching the fabric stick to his frame as it was lowered, likely because of the lingering moisture on his skin. As expected, the dress was still a little loose on Bum. It was so cute that he almost cooed. Dressing Bum was just as fun as bathing him. It was like playing with a pretty little doll, something he'd never been allowed to do as a child, and he was enjoying it. Bum was his sweet and obedient little doll. The sweater followed easily, the soft pink complementing the brunette's dark hair very nicely. The elder had to squirm to get it on, and the way the skirt of the dress was hiked up by that action had Sangwoo's breath caught in his throat. The quick flash of an expanse of flesh was strangely erotic, especially when combined with the fact that its owner would be dead very soon. Bum made a soft, dismayed whimper at his clothing, but he just ignored the man. They had better things to do now. Chapter 7. Come on already. Sangwoo couldn't help but admire Bum, admire his captive in all his beauty. The pretty clothing settled delicately on the smaller man's frame, which was almost humorous considering it once belonged to an older woman. He let his eyes trace over Bum's teasingly exposed collarbone, much in the way he hoped to trace it with his tongue very soon. The brunette looked like such a sweet treat that Sangwoo felt a compulsion to just take him on the still wet bathroom counter. He let out a soft breath, startling his pet, who had begun to look increasingly nervous for the duration of the time it took Sangwoo to snap out of his reverie. Bum. The elder's wide eyes snapped up to meet his, before lowering submissively. How precious. Yes, he answered, voice fearful. His demure mannerisms seemed to be thrown into sharp relief by his new garments. Feminine clothing for feminine actions. Sangwoo let his hand trail from Bum's cheek down to the man's shoulder blades, before gently easing him up into the taller's hold. He felt greatly tempted as to maneuver Bum, so that the brunette was forced to submit to be carried like a bride. He didn't seem to notice though, as he wasn't blushing. If he had, Sangwoo was sure he would have been greeted with that titillating red flush spreading over his skin. What to do now? He felt like he could do anything, but what? He already forced Bum to wear girls' clothes. Proper treatment for a homo, he might have thought a few months ago. If anything, he should have felt that unique rush of satisfaction at making another person bend to his will, that delicious feeling of control. However, he now felt heated, like he wanted to deflower the pretty pastel-garbed bride he now carried in his arms. It was strange, sure, but he supposed his body wanted to fuck. He would fuck. He wasn't sure as to how gays had sex, but he could probably just wing it. It's just like fucking a girl with the addition of lube, right? He supposed so. He could always coerce Bum into teaching him. That in mind, he began walking to his room, Bum in hand. He could distantly hear the soft pitter-patter of water droplets dripping off on Bum, but he paid it no mind. This was almost romantic, carrying his cute little doll to the threshold of his room. Bum really looked the part of a doll too, today. His pale porcelain skin looked pure and embellished, the paleness only helping the contrast against the pitch black of his hair. Those dewy eyes were looking up at Sangwoo, wide as ever. A soft blush was beginning to creep over the elder's cheek. The lace that shifted and brushed against the brunette's thin legs made the perfect picture immaculate. Bum was still and quiet as a little doll too. He absently thought that the man would be just as fragile and easy to break and shatter, but that could be done some other time, he thought as he entered into the cold of his room. It was still dark in here, as he hadn't bothered to turn on the lights and the room lacked a window, but he guessed it could be used to create an atmosphere of intimacy. He almost chuckled as he gently laid Bum onto the ground. What if he acted gentle and loving? Maybe he could get the older to make that stupidly vulnerable and trusting face again. That particular look stirred something awful in Sangwoo. Hey, Bum, he said, and he could see the older man shifting at the sound of his captor's voice. His call had earned him a timidly questioning look. He responded by very kindly taking Bum's chin into his hand and pressing their lips together in a deceptively sweet kiss. His captive started a little, but instantly relaxed as soon as Sangwoo's intentions were clear. Bum murmured softly as the younger licked his way into his partner's sweet mouth. Kissing was pretty fun, Sangwoo supposed. There was something inherently erotic about the brush of lips against lip, the closeness, the slickness of their tongues. The brunette's lips were a little chapped, but Sangwoo could get him some chapstick later, so he dismissed it. Kissing always made Bum become aroused at an embarrassing pace. Sangwoo really had to wonder if Bum was the kind of guy to jizz in his pants. He seemed like it. The younger could imagine him sniffing some boy's briefs in orgasmic glee. What a freak. The thought irritated him somewhat, so he bit down hard to inflict a small amount of pain upon Bum. The squeak that followed was cute enough to spur him on and start moving things a little faster. He let his hand traverse the contours of Bum's body until it rested upon the predictably hard bulge under the pure lace of his skirt. The thought of what this scene must look like had Sangwoo sighing into his already ardent partner's mouth. If anyone saw him like this, they'd assume he was a homo too. Nobody would be seeing this though. So with that knowledge, he began to palm at the pliable hardness under his hand, feeling Bum's hips twitch and hearing his breath stutter, ever sensitive. So far, their relationship had been limited to handies and blowjobs. He wondered if Bum would be willing to go all the way this time. It would be happening either way, but the brunette would squirm more deliciously if it was consensual. So he had to wonder, maybe if he phrased it correctly. Bum, do you want to make love? Yeah, that would work. And it did work. He could see his little pet's entire frame jolt at his words. He looked so bashful all of a sudden, which was almost hilarious considering how fearful he'd been of Sangwoo not 20 minutes ago. There was that vulnerable look again. Bum's eyes were wide and his expression almost worshipful. He was just so desperate for it, for any scrap of Sangwoo's affection. It was intoxicating, being so idolized by another. He felt a swell of something that made him a little uncomfortable, so he shoved Bum on the bed, grinning at the thud he heard. Ow! The elder tried to prop himself up again, but the taller immediately got on top of him, capturing his lips in another kiss. He hadn't heard a yes, but Bum wasn't struggling, so he was probably in the clear. That in mind, he allowed his hand to creep under the delicate heart-laced hem of his captive's dress.